some turning points don't announce themselves. There's no applause. No headlines. No sudden change the world can point to. They happen quietly. Episode 6 begins in a moment where nothing looks different on the outside, but everything is shifting within. The pressure is still there. The uncertainty hasn't vanished. The outcome is far from guaranteed. But something important has changed. This is the episode about alignment. About the moment endurance matures into discipline. When survival thinking gives way to intentional action. Up to this point, the journey has been loud with struggle, pain, doubt, risk, and exhaustion. But now, the noise begins to fade. Not because the problems are solved, but because the mindset has settled. This is where real transformation begins. Not with success, but with stability. Not with confidence, but with clarity. Most people miss this phase because it doesn't look impressive. It doesn't feel exciting. It doesn't come with proof. But history is shaped here. In the quiet moments. In the decisions no one sees. In the resolve to continue without reassurance. This is episode 6. The turning point no one saw, but everything depends on. Pressure has a strange effect on people. For some, it collapses them. For others, it clarifies them. By this stage, Elon Musk wasn't guessing anymore. The chaos had burned away the unnecessary. What remained was focus. Clarity doesn't come when things are easy. It comes when options disappear. When you no longer have the luxury of distraction. When every action must justify its existence. This was the phase where priorities hardened. Not based on comfort, but on consequence. Every hour mattered. Every decision carried weight. Every mistake felt expensive. But clarity also brings peace. Because when you know what matters, you stop negotiating with everything else. This is the lesson of this segment. Pressure doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it edits your life down to what's essential. The noise fades. The vision sharpens. You stop trying to impress. You start trying to execute. And while the world still sees uncertainty, internally, something powerful is happening: alignment. Not confidence. Not certainty. Alignment. When your energy, time, and intention finally point in the same direction. This is when progress becomes inevitable, even if it's not visible. Why? One of the most dangerous phases in any journey is emotional leadership. Decisions made from fear. From excitement. From desperation. By episode 6, that phase was ending. Elon Musk had reached a point where emotion could no longer afford to be in charge. The stakes were too high. The margin for error too thin. This wasn't about passion anymore. It was about precision. Emotional decisions feel good in the moment. Disciplined decisions feel heavy, but compound over time. This is where many people fail. They confuse feelings for signals. But feelings are weather. Discipline is climate. In this phase, choices became slower, calmer, and more deliberate. Not because fear disappeared, but because it was no longer allowed to steer. This segment teaches a powerful lesson. Maturity is when you stop reacting and start responding. When you can feel the pressure, and still choose wisely. That ability doesn't come from talent. It comes from surviving enough storms to recognize patterns. This is where leaders are formed. Not when everything works, but when emotions are acknowledged and then set aside. Because the future doesn't respond to panic. It responds to preparation. There is a special kind of loneliness that comes with making the right decision early. Before validation. Before applause. Before proof. This was that phase. The path forward wasn't crowded. It wasn't popular. And it wasn't reassuring. But it was necessary. Many people assume loneliness means you're doing something wrong. In reality, it often means you're early. When you see what others can't yet understand. When your choices don't make sense to people who aren't carrying your responsibility. This segment reminds us that alignment often isolates before it attracts. Because clarity removes compromise. And compromise is what keeps company around. This was the season of trusting internal conviction over external agreement. Of standing firm without consensus. And that is uncomfortable. But history doesn't reward comfort. It rewards correctness, over time. This is where faith in the process replaces faith in opinions. And that shift changes everything. Not every step forward feels like momentum. Sometimes progress whispers. In this phase, wins were small. Incremental. Uncelebrated. But they mattered. A problem solved. A system improved. A mistake not repeated. This is how foundations are laid. Most people quit here, not because nothing is happening, but because nothing is dramatic. They want fireworks. They overlook friction. But friction is where mastery forms. This segment highlights a critical lesson. Consistency outperforms intensity. Quiet progress compounds faster than emotional bursts. And while the world waits for headlines, the groundwork is being poured. This is the season where patience becomes a competitive advantage. Where showing up daily separates builders from dreamers. And though no one is watching, the future is being constructed piece by piece. Resilience isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for recognition. It just shows up again. By now, resilience had become routine. Not heroic. Not inspirational. Normal. And that's the real power. When strength becomes boring, it becomes reliable. This segment teaches that endurance stops being impressive, and starts being effective. You no longer need to hype yourself. You simply do the work. That's when resilience stops being a trait, and becomes a system. People talk about the cost of quitting. But few talk about the cost of staying. Staying costs energy. Time. Relationships. Comfort. And yet, staying is what changes trajectories. This segment confronts that truth head-on. Because persistence is expensive, but quitting is permanent. The price paid here wasn't glamorous. But it was intentional. And intention is what separates sacrifice from loss. Failure slows you down. Learning speeds you up. By this point, mistakes were no longer repeated, they were analyzed. Every error became data. Every setback became instruction. This is the shift from survival to strategy. From reacting to refining. And once learning outpaces failure, momentum becomes inevitable. Identity solidifies. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. This was the stage where identity stabilized. Not as someone trying, but as someone building. That internal definition changes behavior automatically. And behavior, repeated long enough, changes outcomes. For the first time, the future felt tangible. Not guaranteed. But possible. And possibility is powerful. Because it fuels discipline without demanding certainty. This is when belief becomes grounded, not emotional. No turning back. There comes a point where retreat is no longer an option, not because of pride, but because of alignment. This was that point. The path forward had weight now. Meaning. Momentum. Pressure didn't disappear. If anything, it intensified. But something was different now. The chaos no longer dictated the atmosphere. Deadlines still loomed. Expectations still pressed in from every side. Uncertainty still hovered in the background. Yet calm had entered the room. This wasn't the calm of comfort. It was the calm of preparation. Elon Musk had reached a phase where reaction was replaced with response. Problems arrived, but panic no longer followed. Decisions were made with steadiness, not speed. Emotion was acknowledged, but no longer obeyed. This is what calm under fire looks like. Not silence. Not ease. But control. When storms rage outside and the inside remains grounded. This level of composure doesn't come naturally. It is earned, through repetition, failure, and exposure. Through moments where losing control cost too much. Calm became an asset. A quiet advantage. While others scrambled, focus remained intact. While pressure escalated, clarity held firm. This segment teaches a critical truth. Calm is not the absence of fear, it is mastery over it. And mastery changes outcomes. Because when chaos no longer controls your decisions, your vision becomes executable. This is where leaders separate from participants. Where survival gives way to command. The fire was still burning. But now, it was being used, not feared. There were no crowds watching this phase. No headlines. No recognition. Just work. Quiet, deliberate, uncelebrated work. This was the stretch where progress continued without encouragement. Where effort received no validation. Where results were still forming beneath the surface. And this is where most people fade. Not because they can't do the work. But because they want the work to be seen. Elon Musk was building in obscurity again. Not because he had failed, but because real progress rarely announces itself early. This phase demanded discipline without reward. Showing up without praise. Refining without applause. Correcting mistakes without an audience. This segment reveals a harsh truth. If you need recognition to continue, you're not building, you're performing. Real builders don't need noise. They need direction. And direction was clear. Every quiet improvement mattered. Every unnoticed adjustment strengthened the foundation. This was not glamorous. But it was effective. Because history doesn't record how loud the work was. Only how strong it turned out to be. This is the season where integrity forms. Where commitment proves itself without witnesses. And those who survive this phase are prepared for what comes next. Nothing had exploded into success yet. But something unmistakable was forming. The future no longer felt imaginary. It felt structured. For the first time, the pieces were aligning, not emotionally, but logically. The systems were stabilizing. The vision was narrowing into something executable. This is how breakthroughs begin, not with excitement, but with coherence. The noise of uncertainty was still present, but it no longer drowned out direction. The path forward wasn't easy, but it was visible. And visibility changes behavior. Decisions became proactive instead of reactive. Energy was allocated with intention. Time was protected fiercely. This segment marks a subtle but powerful shift. From surviving the present to preparing for the future. Preparation doesn't look dramatic. It looks patient. It looks like refining processes. Strengthening weak points. Anticipating pressure before it arrives. This is the phase where outcomes are shaped long before they appear. Most people wait for momentum to prepare. But real momentum is built by preparation itself. The shape of what was coming wasn't flashy, but it was solid. And solidity lasts. Episode 6 does not end with a breakthrough. It ends with readiness. That distinction matters. Because readiness is what determines whether opportunity becomes success, or disaster. At this point, nothing was guaranteed. But everything necessary was in place. The mindset was stable. The discipline was ingrained. The vision was aligned with execution. This was no longer about surviving pressure. It was about sustaining momentum. And what comes next will demand exactly that. Episode 6 reminds us that transformation is not a moment, it is a process. One that quietly prepares you for challenges you cannot yet see. The fire is not over. The pressure will return. But now, it will be met with structure, not chaos. In the next episode, preparation will be tested. Alignment will meet consequence. And the world will begin to notice movement. Episode 7 is where the work done in silence begins to echo. But none of it would be possible without this chapter. The quiet chapter. The unseen chapter. The one where everything finally came together, internally. This was episode 6. The turning point no one saw. And now, the story moves forward.